My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. I'm 37 years old, and at my husband's company party last night he laughed, stepped back from me, and said, "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." Everyone heard it. Everyone laughed. Cameras were recording. In that moment, my marriage died in public, but something else was born, the version of me that stopped apologizing. They thought it was just humiliation. They didn't know it was the start of surgery and I was holding the scalpel. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to love you. What happened next isn't just revenge, it's precision, because when a surgeon decides to cut something out of her life, she doesn't miss. The morning after the party, Chicago looked cruelly bright. Sunlight sliced through my blinds like surgical light, clean, merciless. I stood in front of the mirror, still wearing the emerald dress from last night. Mascara hardened into black scars beneath my eyes. My reflection didn't look broken. It looked sedated, controlled. But inside, something was hemorrhaging quietly. I'd replayed that moment in my head 100 times since dawn, the way Nate's hand pushed mine away, the synchronized laughter, the way even the music seemed to mock me with its steady beat. I'd seen people die on operating tables with more grace than that room had shown me. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Nate was already there, perfectly composed, making coffee as if nothing had happened. His posture was immaculate, his voice calm. "You overreacted," he said before I even opened my mouth. "You know how people joke." Joke. That word twisted something in me. I'd spent 15 years building a career where mistakes meant death, where I measured my actions by micrometers and milliseconds. And yet my husband, who'd never spent one night inside an ICU, called public humiliation a joke. But it hadn't started last night. The cracks had been there for years, like hairline fractures in a rib, small, invisible, and cumulative until one wrong breath breaks everything. We'd met 6 years ago at a charity dinner for Street Matthews. He was charming, magnetic, the kind of man who could make a waitress feel like she was the only person in the room. I remember thinking he had the kind of confidence that didn't need validation. That was the first mistake, confusing arrogance for stability. At the time, I was still fresh out of my second surgical fellowship. My life was a blur of scrubs, night shifts, and caffeine. He used to wait for me after late surgeries, standing outside the hospital with coffee and that ridiculous gray scarf he always wore. The nurses called him the perfect husband. On our first anniversary, he gave me a framed photo from that night, me in surgical cap and mask, him waiting in the cold, smiling like love was a reward he'd already earned. I didn't realize he'd framed a performance, not a memory. After the promotion to head of cardiac surgery, things shifted. Suddenly, he started introducing me differently at parties. "This is my wife, Evelyn. She's a surgeon," he'd say with a casual shrug, as if it were a minor inconvenience. The man who once bragged about my skills now treated them like an embarrassment he had to explain away. Then came the coaching. Before every corporate dinner, he'd stand behind me while I got ready and recite the rules. "Don't mention the hospital too much. They find it depressing. Smile when people talk about investments. Even if you don't understand, nod, it's polite. Remember, you're representing us, not just yourself. Us." The word used to mean partnership. With Nate, it came to mean camouflage. At first, I thought he just wanted to fit in with his high society circle, the men who wore their wealth like armor and their wives like accessories. But over time, I saw the pattern. Every new rule was about making me smaller. I remember one Thanksgiving at his mother's house. Patricia was the kind of woman who dressed for breakfast like she might be photographed for a magazine. She poured wine at 10 a.m. and dished out compliments like threats. "You must be so proud of Nathaniel," she said, smiling at me over the table. "He's doing so well for someone without a fancy medical degree." I laughed politely and swallowed the bitterness. Later that day, while washing dishes, she leaned in close enough for me to smell her perfume, expensive, invasive. "A man like my son needs to feel like a man," she whispered. "You understand what I mean, don't you, dear?" I did, and like a fool, I adjusted. That winter, I started declining speaking invitations, letting Nate take credit for my hospital's corporate sponsorships. I told myself it was diplomacy, compromise, but it was erosion. The first real fracture came 2 years ago when I discovered a $25,000 consulting transfer from a Cayman-based company into our joint account. When I asked, he smiled, that same calm, patronizing smile and said, "You wouldn't understand. It's a business optimization fund." Business optimization. I later found out it was a shell company used to funnel investor money that eventually circled back as hospital donations. That's when the nightmares began. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, hearing the beeping of a monitor that wasn't there. I was living in two worlds, one where I saved lives with precision, another where my husband was laundering morality into profit. One night, I walked into his office and saw a text flash across his laptop. "Zoe, you look stressed today. Want to come over? I'll help you relax." He'd minimized it too fast, but not fast enough. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. "She's an intern," he said. "She admires me." "It's harmless." "Harmless?" I whispered. "You're mentoring her." "I'm mentoring you too," he shot back. "You'd be nowhere without my connections." That was the moment I learned the difference between a partnership and a hostage situation. Still, I stayed. I told myself I needed time to gather proof, to protect the hospital, to keep my reputation intact. But part of me stayed because walking away felt like failure. I didn't know it then, but everything, his control, his arrogance, his betrayal, was leading to that one night at Marcus Hale's penthouse. The night he tried to kill my dignity in public. And instead, he performed the autopsy on his own empire. After that night, I couldn't sleep in the same bed. His breathing sounded like static, constant, invasive. I started sleeping in the guest room at first, just claiming I had early rounds, then quietly making it permanent. The sheets there smelled like linen and antiseptic. Safe, sterile, lonely. I began collecting things: receipts, statements, screenshots, voice memos. It started small, almost clinical. Every time he gaslit me, I wrote down the exact words, like charting symptoms of a chronic disease. Patient shows signs of delusion. Denies guilt. Compensates with manipulation. My notes were neat, methodical. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was diagnosing my marriage. It was around that time that Dr. Leela Chen entered the story. She was young, brilliant, and fiercely ambitious. The kind of resident who made you believe the next generation might still have hope. One afternoon, she came to my office, her face pale, eyes darting toward the closed door. "Dr. Carter," she whispered, "someone donated $50,000 to the hospital's research wing. It came from a company called Kmark Holdings." I froze. That was one of the shell entities I'd seen in Nate's emails months ago. "Who approved the transfer?" I asked. Her hands trembled. "Your husband's name was listed as the intermediary." My heart thudded once, twice, like a warning bell. When I got home that night, he was on the couch, watching a financial news segment about corporate transparency. The hypocrisy made me laugh quietly, bitterly. I walked to his study and opened the drawer where he kept his files. Password protected, of course. But he had a habit: birthdays for everything. It took me 5 tries to guess his mother's birthday. Figures. Inside were spreadsheets linking Kmark to 2 other firms, both tracing back to Oliver Grant, his boss. Transfers disguised as consulting reimbursements, dates aligned perfectly with the hospital's donation logs. That was when I realized, it wasn't just infidelity. It was criminal. I didn't report it right away. Not yet. I needed to understand the scope, how deep the infection went. You can't perform surgery without imaging the damage first. A few weeks later, Patricia invited us to dinner. Her townhouse was all marble and gold, the kind of place that smelled like expensive loneliness. She greeted me with that rehearsed warmth only women like her could perfect. "I heard about the research grant," she said, pouring wine with surgical precision. "You must be so proud of Nathaniel's contribution." I looked at her, studying her face. She didn't know the truth yet. "Proud," I repeated softly. "Yes, that's one word for it." Dinner was polite. The tension hummed under every fork scrape, every sip of Merlot. When Nate excused himself to take a work call, I followed him to the study. He turned when he saw me. "You're spying again?" "Spying?" I said, closing the door. That's an interesting word for a husband embezzling donations from a hospital. His expression didn't flicker. He just smirked. "You think anyone will believe you? You're too cold. Too clinical. People like me, we know how to make the world like us." He was right about one thing. People did like him. They liked his easy charm, his fake humility. But charm can't survive sunlight. And I was done living in the dark. After that night, I started recording. Every conversation, every argument, every slip. I stored everything on a secure drive hidden in a surgical supply locker at the hospital. The same locker where I'd once kept my engagement ring before surgeries, afraid it might scratch a patient's heart. Then came the scandal that pushed everything past the point of return. One of our pediatric patients, a 6-year-old girl named Lucy, died on the operating table. It shouldn't have happened. The equipment was faulty, the replacement parts had failed mid-surgery. Later, I found the purchase orders. The original supplier had been replaced by a cheaper vendor linked to one of Nate's shell companies. That was the day I stopped being a wife and became an investigator. I spent nights cross-referencing invoices and bank logs, my office light the only one still burning at 2 a.m. I remember my reflection in the glass, gaunt, focused, furious. For the first time, the woman staring back looked alive. Lila helped me pull internal files under the guise of reviewing donor reports. Rachel, the journalist, contacted me soon after, anonymous email, subject line, "I know what he did." I didn't reply at first, but she persisted, sending documents too detailed to ignore. She wasn't guessing, she was confirming. I met her at Café Bluebird one snowy afternoon. She was smaller than I expected, sharp-eyed, wearing a trench coat that looked 2 sizes too big. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were screenshots of Nate's messages with Oliver Grant plans to move funds offshore before the audit. Rachel leaned in. "You've got enough to bury him. Why haven't you?" I stared at the folder, my coffee untouched. "Because I don't want to bury him," I said quietly. "I want him awake when everything collapses." She smiled. "That's colder than any surgeon I've ever met." I smiled back. "You have no idea." That night, I sat on the floor of my guest room, surrounded by papers, flash drives, and the hum of my laptop. Outside, Chicago snow was falling, soft, relentless, silent. I thought about the first time Nate kissed me in that hospital hallway, about the promise of partnership, about how every betrayal starts as admiration misplaced. And then I thought about Lucy, the little girl who died because someone decided money was worth more than breath. That was when the plan stopped being revenge. It became responsibility. By the time spring came, I had gathered enough evidence to destroy him. But destruction alone wasn't enough. I needed precision. I needed timing. So I waited, patient as a surgeon before incision, steady hand hovering just above the wound. And when the night of the investor gala finally arrived, I was ready to cut. The weeks leading up to the gala felt like living inside a fault line. Every conversation, every text, every dinner carried the tension of something about to give way. Nate seemed calm, too calm. He moved around the house like a man rehearsing for an alibi. Every smile was measured, every word curated. He thought he was in control again. That was his fatal flaw, mistaking silence for surrender. He still gave orders before events, like a director managing a reluctant actress. "Try not to look so serious tonight," he said one evening while I adjusted an earring in the mirror. "You have this intimidating aura. Smile more. People respond to warmth." I met his reflection's gaze. "They respond to money, Nate. That's what you give them. Warmth is optional." He smirked, unfazed. "You're getting cynical. I liked you better when you still believed in people." "Funny," I said, turning away. "So did I." The cracks widened. One afternoon, Dr. Leela Chen found me in the hospital break room, her voice trembling. "You need to see this." She handed me a sealed envelope addressed to the hospital's ethics board. Inside was an anonymous complaint that I'd been accepting illegal kickbacks from donors. The sender claimed to be a concerned colleague. Attached was a photo of me at a corporate dinner with Nate and Oliver Grant. It was a perfect setup, blurred enough to look incriminating, real enough to stick. When I confronted Nate, he didn't even flinch. "You should have listened when I told you to stay out of my business," he said quietly, stirring his drink. "But now you're involved whether you like it or not. You forged an ethics complaint against your wife?" He looked up, feigning innocence. "Oh, come on, Evelyn. If you're so pure, it'll be dismissed. You should thank me. It'll make your record even cleaner." That night, I submitted a formal statement to the hospital board, professional, concise, emotionally void. But what I really sent was a silent signal. I was done playing his game by his rules. A few days later he escalated again. The board suspended me, Pending investigation. My access badge was deactivated. I stood in the hospital lobby. As security escorted me out. Nurses staring like I'd committed a crime. My hands shook, but my face didn't. I knew exactly who'd orchestrated it. Outside, the winter wind cut across my face, sharp as a scalpel. I looked back at the glass doors, at the place that had been my world, and thought, you took my work. Now I'll take your empire. I called Rachel that night. She was ready. We go public? She asked. Not yet, I said. I want him to feel untouchable when the floor drops out. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines as Nate preened through his social circuit fundraisers, investor dinners, charity balls. I saw his photos online, always the same, hand on someone's shoulder, smile perfectly measured. A man in control of his narrative. But the universe has a peculiar rhythm, it gives you just enough rope to hang yourself. 2 weeks later, Patricia called. Her voice was brittle, like fine china cracking. Evelyn, I need to ask you something. Has Nathaniel borrowed money from you lately? Not directly, I said carefully. Why? My retirement fund, she whispered. It's missing $500,000. I closed my eyes. Check your transfers. I'll send you instructions. That night, I drove to her house. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hands shaking as she held the printed statements. The transactions were unmistakable, wire transfers from her fund into a Kmark subsidiary. She sank into a chair, trembling. He stole from me. From his own mother. I knelt beside her. You can help stop him, Patricia. But you'll have to testify. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded. He always said you were too cold, she murmured. Turns out you were the only one who could stay calm in a storm. When I left her house, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt focused. Cold focus is the kind that cuts deepest. A week later, Nate's assistant Zoe Myers showed up at my office door. She looked wrecked, mascara smudged, a hand clutching her stomach. He said he'd protect me, she whispered. But he told Oliver I'm a liability. They fired me. Sit, I told her gently. I'm pregnant, she blurted out. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. I poured her water, waited for her to breathe. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know he was married? I finished. She shook her head. No. I knew that part. I didn't know he was a criminal. I gave her Rachel's number. You're not alone anymore, I said. You just helped bring him down. She looked up, tear-streaked. You don't hate me. I met her eyes. You were a symptom, not the disease. That night, as I packed up my files, I realized the power dynamic had finally inverted. For years Nate had studied how to control my narrative. Now I was the one writing it. But I knew better than to celebrate early. The most dangerous animal isn't the one attacking, it's the one cornered. And Nate Cole was about to feel the walls close in. The first real sign that Nate sensed danger came on a Friday morning. He showed up at the hospital unannounced, holding a bouquet of white roses, his favorite tool of manipulation. He waited in the lobby like a repentant husband from a TV drama, every move calibrated for witnesses. Evelyn, he said as I approached, voice thick with performative remorse. We shouldn't fight like this. People are talking. I looked at the roses. Perfectly arranged, symmetrical, scentless. Just like him. People should be talking, Nate. They just don't know what about yet. His smile twitched, the first hairline crack in his mask. You think you can threaten me? I leaned close enough for only him to hear. No. I'm diagnosing you. He followed me outside, voice low and venomous. You're ruining both of us. You think your reputation will survive once I tell them you're unstable? That you've been under psychiatric review? My jaw tightened. There it was, his next move. That afternoon, I received a formal notice from the hospital's HR department. An anonymous report had claimed I was suffering emotional instability affecting performance. The attached evidence was a fabricated evaluation form, complete with a forged signature from Dr. Lila Chen. Leela stormed into my office when she found out. He's trying to burn you alive before you light him up, she hissed. I smiled tightly. Then he's underestimating how controlled a fire can be. By the end of that week, Nate's campaign of character assassination was in full swing. Whispered rumors. Subtle exclusion from medical briefings. A hospital board member concerned about my mental state. He was weaponizing perception, something he'd mastered long before I ever suspected what he was capable of. But there's one thing manipulators never prepare for: documentation. Every text, every falsified email, every whisper of rumor left a trail. And I was collecting them like surgical samples. Meanwhile, Rachel, the journalist, was threading her own network of sources. She'd traced Kmark Holdings through 3 dummy subsidiaries, all leading back to Oliver Grant's firm and Nate's direct authorization. He's not just laundering money, she told me during one of our late-night calls. He's laundering identities. Half the people on those accounts don't even exist. The deeper we went, the more the rot spread. And then came the twist I didn't see coming. One evening, Leela appeared at my door again, eyes wide. "You should sit down," she said. "Zoe called me. She's in the hospital. Overdose sleeping pills. But she left something for you." My pulse slowed, cold and steady. Zoe survived. Barely. And when I visited her the next morning, she handed me a flash drive from her hospital bed. Her voice was weak but deliberate. "He made me record everything. Said it was for protection." I copied the files. Inside that drive was gold. Audio recordings of Nate and Oliver discussing how to clean the Cayman route, how to move funds through hospital donations, even how to frame me as collateral damage if things went south. It was more than evidence. It was confession. That night, I listened to his voice over and over. Calm, confident, utterly sure of his untouchability. "Evelyn's too careful," he said on the recording. "She'll never make a scene. That's her weakness." He'd made a fatal misdiagnosis. I wasn't incapable of scenes, I just preferred timing. When I forwarded the files to Aiden Brooks, the federal prosecutor, he called within an hour. "Dr. Carter, these are explosive. But you need to be careful. Once we move, there's no going back." "I know," I said quietly. "Just tell me when." In the meantime, Nate was spiraling. The hospital's investigation into my instability had quietly reversed after Leela provided metadata proving the forged forms came from Nate's laptop. Patricia froze his access to her finances and reported the missing funds to the FBI. And yet, he still strutted through social events, desperate to project power. Marcus Hale's annual investor gala was coming up the same marble and champagne circus where Nate loved to peacock. Rachel was attending undercover. The FBI was listening. Patricia had agreed to testify. I stood in front of my mirror the night of the gala, adjusting my black satin dress. Calm. Controlled. The same way I'd looked the night he humiliated me. Except this time, the scalpel was in my hand. When Nate called from downstairs, his tone was rehearsed. "You ready?" I picked up my clutch inside, a small flash drive identical to the one Zoe had given me. "Always," I said. He smiled, thinking he'd won me back. He had no idea he was walking into his own dissection. The elevator doors opened to a world drenched in money and deceit. Marcus Hale's penthouse glittered like a diamond held over a flame, all marble floors, glass walls, and the hollow echo of champagne laughter. People in tailored suits floated from conversation to conversation, feeding on each other's vanity. And in the middle of it all stood Nate Cole, radiant with false confidence. He greeted me with that same stage-ready smile he'd perfected years ago. "Evelyn, you look stunning," he said, his hand resting on my back, light, controlling, practiced. "Almost convincing," I replied. He didn't even catch it. He was too busy scanning the crowd for his next audience. I watched him transform, slipping into his performance the charming investor, the golden boy. No one in this room knew they were shaking hands with a felon. Not yet. Rachel was already here, disguised as a PR consultant, her phone angled subtly toward the center of the room. Aiden Brooks, the federal prosecutor, was in a black suit near the bar, pretending to text. I caught his eye for a fraction of a second. He gave the slightest nod. The orchestra shifted to a slower tune. Conversations dimmed as Marcus raised a glass. "To loyalty and legacy," he announced, grinning like a man unaware of the fuse burning beneath his feet. Nate stepped forward to give his toast, because of course he did. "To the people who make this world run," he said smoothly, "the dreamers, the believers, the ones who know how to build something that lasts." I waited for the perfect pause, the inhale before applause. Then I stepped into the light. "Speaking of things that last," I said, my voice clear enough to carry. "Some legacies age well. Others rot from the inside." The room shifted. Nate's smile faltered. "Evelyn, What are you doing? I lifted my phone. Performing an autopsy. Behind me, Rachel's device connected to the penthouse projector. The screen above the bar flickered, first static, then sound. Nate's voice filled the room. Calm. Collected. Recorded. We'll clean the Cayman route. Move the hospital funds before the audit. Make it look like a patient donation. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Marcus's face drained of color. Oliver Grant turned away, whispering to his assistant. Nate lunged forward. That's fake. She's setting me up. But then another voice joined the recording, his own again, unmistakably smug. Evelyn's too careful. She'll never make a scene. I looked straight at him. You were wrong about that. The air thickened. Patricia stepped out from the crowd. Every inch the matriarch reborn in vengeance. You stole from me, Nathaniel, she said, her tone surgical. From your own mother. He froze. Mom. Don't, she snapped. You wanted power? You have it. The power to ruin yourself. Aiden's voice cut through the noise. Nathaniel Cole, Oliver Grant, Marcus Hale, you're under investigation for securities fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Agents are on their way. Nate's eyes darted from me to Aiden to Rachel. His chest rose and fell, panic breaking through the polish. You can't do this. Evelyn. Please? I stepped closer. You did this to yourself. The sound of sirens grew louder from the street below. Red and blue lights fractured against the penthouse glass, painting the party in shards of reality. He reached out, as if touch could rewrite what had been done. I loved you, he whispered. I tilted my head, studying him like a failed experiment. Then you should have treated me like someone alive, not a reflection of your ego. Agents burst through the doors, voices commanding. The room erupted, guests shouting, glasses shattering, heels scraping marble. Nate stood motionless, watching his empire collapse in real time. As they cuffed him, his eyes found mine again, searching for something: pity, regret, salvation. He found nothing. I smiled. Not the polite one. Not the mask he'd trained me to wear. This smile was quiet and cold, the kind that ends stories. When the elevator doors closed behind him, I exhaled for the first time in years. The autopsy was complete. The next morning, Chicago woke to headlines that gleamed sharper than scalpels. Investment golden boy exposed an $80 million fraud. Surgeon wife orchestrates whistleblower sting. My phone buzzed until the battery died. But I didn't answer a single call. Not Rachel's, not the hospital board's, not the FBI's follow-up line. I just stood by the window of my apartment, watching the river move, cold, unbothered, relentless. By noon, Patricia came over. No jewelry, no makeup, just an envelope in her trembling hands. The retirement accounts, she said softly. Everything Nate took. It's frozen now, but there's something you should see. Inside were the statements, transfers, returns, and a single anonymous deposit. $100,000, Street Matthews Pediatric Cardiac Fund. The date was 3 days before Nate's arrest. He didn't send that, Patricia whispered. Did you? I nodded once. Before the FBI traced the accounts, I rerouted part of his slush fund into the hospital's children's wing. Legal now. Untouchable. For the first time, Patricia smiled, small, bitter, proud. You performed open-heart surgery on his empire. Correction, I said quietly. On mine. Later that week, Aiden called from the courthouse. He's taking a plea deal, 8 years, maybe less with cooperation. Let him talk, I said. The truth will only cut him deeper. Outside, snow began to fall, swirling through the city lights like sterile ash. I slipped on my coat and walked toward the hospital. The air smelled like metal and winter. For the first time, it didn't sting. In the elevator, my reflection looked unfamiliar, still calm, but lighter somehow. The woman who once flinched at humiliation had vanished. When I stepped into the operating room, the monitor beeped steady and sure. Scalpel, I said. Some wounds can't be healed. Others need to be cut open first. And I wasn't done cutting. If you've ever been told to stay quiet when someone tried to break you, this story is your reminder. Silence only protects the guilty. Dr. Evelyn Carter didn't just survive humiliation. She dissected it, exposed it, and rebuilt herself from the inside out. Betrayal hurts, but truth cuts cleaner. And sometimes, revenge isn't fire or fury, it's precision. If you believe respect should never come at the cost of your voice, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story. This isn't over. More reckonings are coming.